as I'd mentioned earlier, this concept of forgiveness in the sense of not knowing, not having information. When is a sin after all? And ignorance of things doesn't make you guilty. I believe that's true. What you don't know, you can't be held accountable for. You got to know what the framework is. And so as I think about this, and I think about, again, I'll use that example, Christ is on the cross, he's got his side slit, the guy's there who's the executioner doing his job as executioner, and Christ says, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. Wow. Can you do that? You know, if you're a Christian, you want to emulate Christ, can you forgive people that easily? I mean, I haven't met very many that could. How about the fact that the guy worked for 30 years? He had a job, you know, a J-O-B. He was a carpenter, or some say a bricklayer. But knowing, you know, having done a fair amount of both in my life, at least a little bit, I know what your hands look like when you're done at the end of a day. And I know what it looks like at the end of a year. And I can't imagine, you know, 30 years of doing it with the tools they had back then. Those hands had to be pretty tough hands. So what happened that we do know from that story? We know this guy at 12 was in the temple freaking everyone out, you know, because all the Jewish priests could not understand where this kid got all this knowledge. And so they, you know, that was kind of the last you heard about him until 18 years later, right? 18 years later, he shows up at the River Jordan is how the story goes. Now, where was he for 30 years? There's a lot of speculation about that. There's a lot of writing even about that. But let's just lay that aside and let's just assume he was a carpenter, made a living doing something. That's interesting because there's a lot of people that call themselves ministers and priests that never had a job. They call that their job. It's kind of interesting to me. Just as a side note, it'd be nice to have a real job. And then I start thinking about all that and what happened with this guy. He shows up at the Jordan River, and there's this guy, John the Baptist, there that's going to purify him in water, baptize him in water. Physical body, clean this body in water. I do that every morning. That's part of my morning ritual. When I take my bath, it's not about just getting clean, it's my own baptism again. I do it every morning. It's a revitalization of and a re-anchoring of my physical form and my spiritual form with my mental, emotional form. And I do it as a ritual in the morning to bring my heaven and my earth back together as I go into my day and leave my other space that I was in when I was in another aspect of this multiverse in my sleep. So I come back in to kind of gear my day around my day. Now, why do I use the voice and toning in my own prayer work? Because for me, if you feel my chest, and when I get around the country and you have an opportunity to, I'll invite you to do so, you'll feel it vibrate in my chest. My voice is deep, it comes down deep. It comes down deep because I bring it from here, not from here. Most people talk up here. And you hear it in their voice, stress, because they're stressed out all the time. In calmness, your voice settles deep. In stress, it goes high. It's another quick little thing you'll notice about yourself. Bring your voice lower, bring it deeper, bring it into your heart. I do it by exercising it with breath work, with a combination of breath work, movement, voice itself, because my work is about my voice. What I do in the world is about my voice, and I take it seriously. So my prayer work, my voice work, it's all feeds what I'm doing, coming out of energy into form. I see my life that way. This is how our lives actually are. Whether we want to believe that or not, it's a matter of science. That is how it is. So again, part of this story, he gets dropped under the water, you purify the body, and then what happens? Then this dove descends on him, is how the story goes. And it's considered the Holy Spirit, or the energy, if you will, the third aspect of God. If you remember in the Christian faith, there's three. Another time, triples come up. There's the Godhead, God the Son, and then there's this energy, the Holy Spirit. Somehow these are one thing, but they're still three things. It's one of those mysteries the Catholics used to tell me. This is a mystery, a mystery. There were always mysteries that you weren't supposed to ever figure out. I don't believe in that. These are truths that you're supposed to know, not mysteries withheld so someone has power over you. It's mysteries aren't mysteries. That's a lie. It's information that people don't want to give you. It's hidden knowledge. When you hide knowledge, you know what occult means? That which is hidden. Okay? This is making religion a cult when you hide the truth to manipulate people. This happens in all religion because it's about power, and real power comes from what you know about creation. So withholding that knowledge is where power is, and delivering it in what are called initiations or special rites of passage. Through every single culture that's ever been, there's these, all of them, whether it's shamanistic practices, Buddhist practices, Hindi practices, Christian practices. There are all kinds of practices. There are many altars. There's one God and one creation. That's what I would say. And I would say all paths honestly followed, everyone knocking honestly will find an answer in that regard, and should. In this metaphor, using this again as an example, what happened after that? Okay, now he's in his power, which to me is this thing. Now the ego and the awareness have come together. The ego and the awareness have merged into one human. And now the three levels of awareness have come together. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Now we have the whole being functioning within the earth. And what happens then? He goes into the desert for 40 days. And 40 days in this framework of symbols represents a generation or 40 years within the context of biblical structure. So he's there for this generation of time, and in that we hear the story as the devil is tempting him with, you can have everything in the earth, all the treasure in the world is yours. All you have to do is just take it. You don't need to do this other thing. And the message is, get behind me, get behind me. Now here's what I see in that for all of us. This is you fighting with your ego. This is you fighting with your own flesh, your storage device that holds all that experience, thought, and information that wants to run you around and be all these things everyone told you to be as you were constructing your reality out of other people's expression from the time you were this little child. So here you are now in this metaphorically lifetime battle that Christ is playing out. Get behind me, get behind me. And what he's really saying is, I already have all this stuff, and you need to serve me. The physical needs to serve me. I already have all this stuff. The same is true. You already have this body. It already carries you. It just thinks it's in charge too much of the time. You have this mind and emotions. It thinks all that experience is what should be all of the time. The judgment, the observation about those experiences is your awareness, the higher level of yourself that connects to consciousness. So that's what you're really connecting with when you connect top down. You're connecting with creation as expressed in your microcosm, your hologram, yourself, and then you're pulling that into your mental, emotional state, and then you're pulling that into your physical experience, how you want to play this in the world. And those are choices that you get to make. When I think about the 40 days in the ego battle, so what comes out of that? What comes out of that is the enlightened person whose body now serves them, whose emotions and mind serves them, and now the real game begins, and 3 years of Christ's ministry in the earth began. And whether you want to go there or not is irrelevant to me. This is a model for transformation that I'm trying to describe, which is at some point this person altered what they were doing and became something different. And there were many other enlightened people, saints, whatever you want to call them, that have come and gone in the earth, that have discovered things, that have learned things. What all of them have said is it's about you. And then what has always happened is somebody else comes along and goes, oh, I don't want them to know this, because then they'll know about me. And they had something to hide from themselves, and they thought they could hide it from you too. And this is, again, where the problem begins. People don't like giving up power and so on. But you can be born again fresh on your own every day with your own ritual in the morning. And that's what I'm describing. Create your own. Don't use mine. Find yours, whatever it is, but find one that leads you to the curious looking until you have answers, and then do something with it. But speak it out. I think this is critically important. What I started doing with my prayer life a number of months ago, I started speaking it out more, and not with people around. Don't do that. You can do that if you want to, I guess, but don't do that. Find a private place. Have that conversation with God privately, not to show anyone anything, but to have a conversation. And I started having it like I would with a friend of mine. You know, hey God, this is what I'm thinking, this is what's going on, and have that conversation. Then I just wait. And I do it in walks. I'd walk twice a day and walk around my neighborhood. And that's the way it kind of started getting a little more active back in November. And this is now 6 months ago. But in that conversation, what I would do is then just wait, just be quiet, walk for a few more blocks or even a few more feet. And then I would start to see answers to what I was, you know, not like hearing voices, none of that. Just start to think and start to feel, start to see how things could come together. So I put it out there in a verbal way, waited a little bit, let it come back in. And sometimes not right away. Sometimes it'd be the next day, it'd dawn on me, or I'd wake up in the morning. But at least I spoke it out. I put it out there, and then was aware enough. Watch for it. Maybe it come from someone else. Someone else come and talk to me and say something. You go, wow, that was exactly what I did here. Because that's how it works. Or maybe it was just to see something or to read the right article. And people call that synchronicity. Synchronicity is not, most of us think about them as this big event, you know, big coincidence. Synchronicities are everything you're doing. You just notice the big ones. The whole thing is a big synchronicity. The whole thing has a plan. The whole thing has form. It's called a fractal. A fractal, you get back far enough you can see the form in it, but when you're in it, it looks like chaos. Or let me take it a different way. An Assemblies of God minister once said in a deal, he said, if you don't know who's in charge, take over, and if they throw you out of town, get in line and act like it's a parade. It's about perception, ladies and gentlemen, is what he was saying. You know, it's how you behave determines a lot about how people act towards you. The fact that I could look in a person and see their potential and begin acting as if that potential was already realized, it drew it right out of them. That's the mark of a good leader. They'll draw it right out of them. And then all of a sudden, 6 or 8 months goes by and the person goes, I never thought I could do that. Right. That's the point. They never did think they could do that. But what they could see is what I saw, their next step. That's the point I'm making, is faith is easy. Easy, it's not hard. Doubt is easy too. It's not hard. They're easy. Choose one. Just choose the right one, yours. If you want to live in a world of doubt, go for it, man. I know what it'll get you, so do you. But you get to decide, and it's just as easy to not choose that. And this is the point I'm making. So transfiguration happens. Okay, how does that happen? In your daily deal, evaluate who you are. Be ready to reassess who you are. Remember what you are. Use some of these practices. Another one that works very good, a very simple one I'll give you right now. This is another key. For stress and anxiety, it'll dissipate it within a couple of minutes. And you do it this way. You take in your breath through your nose, you count to 5 in your head. To a 5 count, as deep as you can get it, and then you let it out of your mouth to a 10 count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. To a 10 count. In to a 5, out through the in through the nose, out through the mouth. In through the nose, out through the mouth. 5 in, 10 out. 3 times you do that. That's it. Your blood pressure will drop 10 points. Just like that. It'll calm you. It'll bring your brain into a calmness where you can start to think again. That's all you got to do. If it kicks back up in 30 minutes, do it again. Do it as often as it takes to keep your mind calm when you need to make tough decisions. I'll tell you another key while we're on keys, simple one with breath. With little kids, it's a good one to play with. Is one of the reflexes of the human body, because as I mentioned, it kind of likes to hang around, is when you get no oxygen, what happens? Everything shuts down, you know, from the extremities out, except the blood flow to the brain is kept going as long as possible. The vessels and veins dilate to make more blood flow go into the brain when it's oxygen deprived. So how can you use that? Well, if you're going to do a math test or a complicated test where you want a little more oxygen in the brain, a little more circuitry working a little better, you hold your breath as long as you can. Just hold it as long as you possibly can until you just have to release it. And what happens is all that plumbing dilates and stays dilated for about 20 to 30 minutes. So your brain is capable of more complex function and has more oxygen. It has what it needs to do its job better. You can teach little kids this by playing games with them between 3 and 5. Hey, let's hold our breath as long as we can. And what happens is you're dilating it, and it becomes a pattern for them that tends to keep them a little bit dilated, which helps them in oxygen and getting rid of toxins that otherwise penetrate the blood-brain barrier. But transformation, things you can do, prayer as a daily ritual, develop your own. If you don't believe in anything, believe in love, make a prayer about that. Because as I said in the very beginning, that's both a verb and a noun, depending on how you use it. Start with what you can accept. Don't go anywhere else, because otherwise you're just lying and nobody's interested in that. Movement, combining movement. This is a physical form. It requires movement. Now, what I did in my second marriage, it was not a comfortable marriage. It was a long one. It was a little over a quarter of a century. In that marriage, because of a number of things that occurred in it, I was able to pretty much shut the body down, ignore it, so I could do my work for a couple days at a time and not hear anything, not deal with anything, forget to eat, forget to sleep, forget everything, just get it done, get so focused the body would be forgotten. That isn't a good way to live, I can tell you. I did that for way too long. And one day when I was on a really crazy trip, I picked up a car in Dallas and drove back to Anchorage and did it in 4.5 days, and it's a very long distance. And I was driving 18, 20 hours a day when I was driving. And as I got out of the car, and I was in Chickaloon actually, going up to Chief's house, and it was about midnight, and I'd called him a couple hours out. And I'm walking up to his house, and I realized that my body, I'm awake, I'm aware as awake as I am right now. But my body wasn't cooperating with me. It really didn't want to move. It didn't want to get up and do this. And that's when I realized that I had really separated myself in a way that was probably not a good idea. And so at that point, that was 10 years ago, a couple weeks before my final end of my second marriage. And what I did is I purposed myself to fix that. And so I decided 10 sessions of Rolfing was going to be part of that, to integrate the muscle tissue and deal with emotional stuff that was embedded there. And the other was acupuncture, which I'll explain in a little bit, because that's an energetic system of the body that for me, if that were reset, then that again, form follows the energy, and in the case of acupuncture, there's a lot there, and I'll explain more about that later. But again, these are practices, things that can work. I'm giving it within a metaphor of change, but born again is being done every day. You do it every day. That phrase has been used in such crummy ways, I don't even like it. Transformation. You should transform every day based on what you've learned. Forget about all the religious connotations. You should transform every day based on what you've learned, incrementally. Some people have a lot of activity. I'm one of those, has a lot of activity, a lot of opportunity to learn, a lot of opportunity to fail too. But my path and your path are quite different, but they're equally as important and critically need to be done, because it's the small things that turn out to be the big things, and the big things that often turn out to be the small things. But the things that don't get done are the disasters, because that's just missed opportunity. And that's failing to even see ourselves as successful, and we don't need to be doing that. We are successful. So part of it is sort of, and the way I see this in this whole thing is dying to ourself, is letting go with those things that really are now in our way. The parts that have been imposed upon us since birth, since we first came into the world, start to re-examine the structures of belief that we have, not to shake them up, but to ask ourselves, do we really believe that, or are we parroting? Fix that. If you're parroting, it's time to fix it. Either you know it or you don't, and if you don't know it, start admitting it and start looking again. Education ends when you die of old age. And then I think we learn somewhere else in a different way. Consciousness doesn't just end. But wherever you're at right now in terms of your life, that's what you carry when you leave here. That. And we don't have to do that. We can do a lot here. We have here the advantage of time and space. So we can catch up with ourselves here. In the multiverse and other realities, time and space don't exist. This is the only place that exists. Other places, it's not even a part of the equation, which means things don't happen in a row over time in those realities. They just happen all at once. Now, that's how creation actually happens all at once, but we can't perceive it. We get it on the installment plan of life, at least in this framework, that is framed within the context of the limits of all of our sensory organs within the physical bit, within the limits of what the mind and brain does, but also within the perimeters of consciousness, which are unlimited. So the break in relationship with consciousness is maintained by power structures who understand the power of what I'm talking about. And when you run from the earth up and you just want to hang on to things and you really believe this is all there is, the idea that there may be something deeper, that there may be something more, scares people. When we get into the mind control stuff our governments were doing, this is where you'll get a lot more of this as we get into it. But moving off of that metaphor and that whole concept of transformation, because I think that's really what it is. We have the opportunity to transform into co-creators. We can choose to do that with our experiences every day. But we should be doing that every day in some fashion.